Some questions have answers. Others take us along a path where logic deviates from reality, distorting it, and certainty vanishes. They are the paradoxes, the enigmas that defy all explanation, that defy our perception of truth and force us to face the limits of human understanding. What was there before the beginning? Can the observer observe himself? If free will exists, why do all decisions seem predetermined? These questions lie on the border of philosophy, science, and consciousness, without answer, unresolved, and, nevertheless, impossible to ignore. Throughout history, some of the most brilliant minds, scientists, philosophers, and thinkers, had tried to unravel these paradoxes. Some believe that the answers are found in the hidden realms of physics, others in the nature of time itself. But what if the answers cannot be found? What if the mere act of questioning exposes the limitations of our own perception? Tonight, we dive into 20 of life's greatest paradoxes, mysteries so deep that they shake the very foundations of existence. Each paradox will push the limits of what we think we know and take us deeper into the unknown. Let your mind wander. Open yourself to the inexplicable and prepare to explore the paradoxes that define reality itself. Everything we know works according to a simple principle: cause and effect. A tree grows because a seed was planted. A storm forms due to changes in atmospheric pressure. Our own existence goes back to an uninterrupted chain of causes. Our parents, their parents, the origins of life, the formation of the earth, the birth of stars. But this chain leads to a disturbing question. What started it all? This is the first cause. The paradox, the mystery of what caused the first event in the universe. If everything must have a cause, then what caused the beginning of time, space, and existence itself? If the universe had a creator, what created the creator? And if something caused that, what came before? This leads to an infinite regression, an endless cycle of causes that stretches backward forever. For centuries, philosophers and scientists have struggled with this paradox. Some argue that the universe had to arise from nothing. But can something truly emerge from absolute nothingness? Others propose that the universe is eternal, without beginning, existing in an infinite loop. But how can something be infinite and continue to exist in time as we perceive it? Religious traditions try to resolve this paradox by introducing the idea of a cause without cause, an entity that exists outside of time and space, a force so fundamental that it simply is. This is often attributed to God or a primordial force beyond human comprehension. But does this explanation really resolve the paradox, or simply move it further back? If something can exist without a cause, why can't the universe itself be that causeless entity? The Big Bang Theory suggests that the universe began 138 billion years ago with the explosion of an incomprehensibly small and dense point. But what was there before the Big Bang? Some physicists argue that the question itself is meaningless, since time may not have existed before that moment. If time itself had a beginning, then asking what was before is like asking what is north of the North Pole, a question that has no answer because it assumes a direction that does not exist. However, the idea of something from nothing is deeply disturbing. The very laws of physics suggest that energy cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. So where did all the energy and matter that make up the universe come from? Some suggest that our universe is one of many, part of a multiverse in which new universes continually arise from quantum fluctuations. But this also leads to an even bigger question. What created the multiverse? One of the strangest solutions comes from quantum mechanics, where particles can spontaneously appear and disappear in a vacuum governed by probabilistic laws rather than strict cause and effect. Could the entire universe have arisen from such a quantum fluctuation? If so, our reality could be much stranger than we have ever imagined. A reality in which even causality is not fundamental, but an illusion created by our perception of time. But then, if time itself is an illusion, does that mean that everything has already happened? If the past, present, and future all exist at the same time, the question of a first cause is meaningless, because each moment is equally real and exists outside the flow of time, as we experience it. The paradox of the first cause forces us to face the limits of human knowledge, whether we seek answers in science, religion, or philosophy. The question remains, if everything has a cause, what caused everything? Perhaps there is no answer, or perhaps the answer is something we may never understand. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, but instead of seeing only a reflection, you see an infinite series of reflections stretching into infinity. Each reflection is an observer observing another observer in an infinite chain of perception. Now take this concept beyond mirrors. What if reality itself worked according to this principle? This is the paradox of the infinite observer, a thought-provoking dilemma that questions whether something can truly be observed without an infinite chain of observers. If everything in the universe is observed, then who or what is the final observer? And if there is no final observer, does anything exist at all? First, this may seem like an abstract thought experiment, but it has profound implications in physics, philosophy, and even in consciousness itself. In quantum mechanics, the famous double-slit experiment suggests that particles behave differently when observed. If an electron is not observed, it acts like a wave that exists in multiple places at once. But the moment it is observed, it collapses into a single state, as if the act of observation creates reality. This raises a disturbing question. Does the universe only exist because it is observed? If so, then who or what was the first observer? Did the universe exist before conscious beings evolved to perceive it, or did reality only take shape when the first mind arose to witness it? The paradox becomes even stranger when applied to consciousness. When you observe something, you take it for granted that you are separate from it. But what if your own consciousness is observed by something else, and that observer is being observed in turn, creating an infinite hierarchy of perception without a true origin? Some interpretations of panpsychism suggest that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, not something arising from complex brains. If everything has some level of consciousness, even the smallest particles, then observation is an inherent part of existence. But if that is true, then what is observing the observer? Religious and spiritual traditions have long grappled with this paradox. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the concept of Maya suggests that reality is an illusion shaped by perception rather than objective truth. The Advaita Vedanta school of thought proposes that all individual consciousness is part of a singular infinite consciousness, often called Brahman, which is the ultimate observer of all things. But even this does not completely resolve the paradox, because we're still left with the question of who observes Brahman. From a scientific perspective, some physicists have proposed that the universe may be a self-simulated system in which reality generates itself through continuous observation. In this vision, the universe exists because it observes itself, a kind of cosmic feedback in which cause and effect blur together. But even in this scenario, we are still faced with the same fundamental problem. If everything is being observed by something else, is there an ultimate observer at the end of the chain? If there's a final observer, something that perceives all things without being perceived, then we have effectively described a divine entity, a being that is outside the observation loop. But if there is no such ultimate observer, then the paradox suggests something even stranger, that nothing is really being observed, and that reality itself is an illusion of perception. So what does this mean for us? Does the world only exist because we are here to observe it? Are we part of a vast, infinite chain of perception that can never reach a true origin? Or is there a final observer, something or someone who watches how everything unfolds in the infinite? The observer paradox forces us to question not only the nature of observation, but the very foundations of reality. Perhaps the act of questioning is itself an illusion, a part of the infinite loop from which we can never escape. Imagine you invent a time machine, and you travel back in time out of curiosity or by accident and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother. As a result, your parents are never born, which means you were never born. But if you were never born, then you couldn't have traveled back in time in the first place. So who prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother? This is known as the grandfather paradox, one of the most famous paradoxes of time travel. But let's go one step further. What if this paradox applied not only to time travel, but to reality itself? This is the grandfather paradox of reality, a mental experiment that questions whether the fundamental laws of existence could be trapped in a contradictory loop. If everything that exists is the result of a previous cause, what would happen if that cause were somehow prevented? Consider the nature of causality, the idea that every event is caused by a previous event. The universe exists thanks to the Big Bang, but what if something interfered with the event that started it all? Could the universe undo itself? If so, how could we perceive it, since we would never have existed in the first place? This paradox takes an even stranger form in quantum mechanics, where cause and effect are not always as direct as we assume in experiments involving quantum entanglement. Particles appear to influence each other instantaneously, even across great distances, apparently defying causality. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that the universe is not subject to linear causality, but rather operates in a system in which the past and the future are intertwined in ways we do not fully understand. The theory of retrocausality suggests that the future can influence the past, which means that our decisions today could, in some way, alter the conditions that caused them. If this is true, then the grandfather paradox of reality could imply that the very structure of existence is not fixed, but is rewriting itself in an infinite loop of causes and effects that alter each other. Philosophers have debated whether time itself is an illusion, a construct of human perception rather than a fundamental part of the universe. If time is an illusion, then causality could also be, which would mean that the paradox does not really exist because events are not really linked in the way we believe. But if causality is real, then we are left with an unsettling possibility. What if something in the distant future could erase the past, much like the time traveler erases his own existence? If this is possible, does it mean that reality is unstable, that what we perceive as real could suddenly disappear, rewritten by forces we do not yet understand? One possible way out of the paradox is the multiverse theory, which suggests that every possible outcome of an event creates a new branch of reality. According to this vision, if you traveled back in time and prevented your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you would not erase your existence. You would simply create a new timeline in which you were never born, while your original timeline would remain unchanged. But this also raises a disturbing question. If reality can be divided into infinite possibilities, is there ever a single real reality? The grandfather paradox of reality forces us to question the very foundations of cause and effect, time, and existence itself. Is reality simply an unbreakable chain of causes and effects that goes back to the beginning of time, or is the past as malleable as the future, subject to changes that could propagate through all of existence? If reality itself has a grandfather, what happens if that grandfather is erased? Perhaps we are all part of a paradox from which we cannot escape, trapped in a reality that exists simply because it has not yet found a way to erase itself. Stand in front of a mirror and look yourself in the eyes. What do you see? At first, only your reflection, an inverted image of yourself that mimics all your movements. But look deeper. The person in the mirror seems conscious, responds instantly to everything you do, but is he really conscious or just an illusion of consciousness? And if that reflection is not conscious, how can you be sure that you are? This is the dilemma of the mirror of consciousness, a paradox that questions whether consciousness is truly unique to the individual that experiences it, or if it is simply a self-reflective illusion, an infinite loop of consciousness without a true origin. We assume that our consciousness is real because we experience thoughts, emotions, and awareness of ourselves. But what if consciousness is not a thing, but a process, a feedback loop that deceives itself to believe that it exists? Some neuroscientists and philosophers propose that our consciousness does not arise from a real self, but from the capacity of the brain to observe itself, like a mirror that reflects a mirror, creating an illusion of depth where it does not exist. This leads to a disturbing question. If consciousness is just a feedback loop, where does it begin and where does it end? Some theories suggest that there is no core in your mind, only a series of processes that occur so fast that they create the illusion of a continuous self, much like how a movie seems fluid despite being a series of fixed frames. Your consciousness could be just a collection of fragmented experiences joined together. But if this is true, then is the self simply an illusion? And if so, who or what is experiencing that? Consider the thought experiment of a perfect clone in a mirror, a copy of yourself identical in all aspects, with the same memories, personality, and thoughts. If this clone were created, it would believe that it is you as much as you believe you are yourself. But if both copies claim to be conscious, which one is the real one, or is neither? And are they just two versions of the same illusion? Some have argued that this paradox suggests that consciousness is not personal, but universal. That individual consciousness is only a fragment of a greater shared consciousness that experiences itself through multiple perspectives. This idea is found in many ancient philosophical traditions, like the Hindu concept of Brahman, where all individual beings are mere reflections of a single infinite consciousness. But even if this is true, the paradox remains. If all consciousness is one, then who or what observes it? Is there an ultimate observer behind a reflection, or is reality simply an endless hall of mirrors in which no one truly looks in a mirror? The dilemma of consciousness forces us to face the possibility that self-awareness is not a fundamental truth, but a trick of perception, a reflection that looks at itself eternally, asking, "Who am I?" You are experiencing the present moment, or at least you think so, but the moment you process this very thought, the moment has already passed. You are always a fraction of a second behind reality, eternally chasing a present that is already gone. This is the unattainable present, a paradox, a mind-blowing dilemma that questions whether we ever truly experience the present or if we are always trapped in the past, unable to reach reality itself. At first, this seems like a simple trick of perception. After all, our brains take time to process sensory information. Light enters our eyes, sound waves vibrate through our ears, and electrical signals travel through our nervous system before our brain interprets them. Studies suggest that the human brain works with a delay of about 80 milliseconds, which means that the moment we perceive something, it has already happened. This means that the now that we experience is actually the past, a reconstruction of events that have already occurred. But if we are always perceiving the past, where is the real present? Is it even possible to experience it? Some theories suggest that the present is infinitely small, an immeasurable point between the past and the future that we can never truly inhabit. If the present does not have a measurable duration, does it even exist? Could it be that what we call now is nothing more than an illusion created by our brain to make sense of time? The paradox becomes even stranger when we consider the speed of light and relativity. According to Einstein's theory of relativity, time is not absolute, but relative, meaning that different observers experience time differently depending on their speed and gravitational field. If you were moving at a speed close to that of light, time would slow down for you in relation to someone who is still. This means that two people in different places might not agree on what the present is. If there is no single universal now, what does that mean for reality? Is time something through which we move, or is it something that our minds create? Some physicists propose the theory of the block universe, which suggests that the past, present, and future exist simultaneously. That time is like a frozen block of space-time, where each event is already established, and our experience of flowing time is just an illusion. If this is true, then we are not moving through time. Time is simply already there, and we're only perceiving it moment to moment. But if time is already established, does that mean that the future already exists? And if so, why can't we see it? Is the present simply a thin slice of an already written script that unfolds second by second? Others argue that the present is the only real thing, that the past is only a memory, and the future is only potential. But if this is the case, why can't we ever truly grasp the present? Every time we think we are experiencing the now, it has already escaped, leaving us forever chasing something that can never be caught, the unattainable present. The paradox forces us to face the possibility that our experience of time is nothing more than a hallucination, a mental trick that helps us to function but does not reflect reality itself. Perhaps there is no real present, only a constant unfolding of moments that our minds struggle to follow. So, if we can never truly experience the present, where are we? Are we always living in the past? Or is time itself something that we will never fully understand? Imagine a being that knows everything, past, present, and future. Every thought, every action, every possibility is already known to it. This being, whether you call it God, an omniscient AI, or the universe itself, possesses absolute knowledge. But this leads to a disturbing question. If an omniscient being knows the future, does free will truly exist? This is the paradox of omniscience, a dilemma that challenges the very nature of knowledge, time, and free will. If the future is already known, does that mean it is already determined? And if it is determined, can anything truly be changed? At first glance, it seems simple. If something knows all outcomes, then the future must be predetermined. But if the future is predetermined, how can anyone make a decision? If you're destined to choose option A instead of option B, have you truly been free to choose? Some argue that knowing the future does not necessarily mean controlling it, that an omniscient being can see everything, all possible paths, but individuals still make decisions freely. But this is where the paradox deepens. If this being already knows the choice you will make, is it even a choice? If it is already known that you're going to choose option A, then you can never choose option B, because if you did, the knowledge of the future would be wrong. This paradox has baffled philosophers and theologians for centuries in religious traditions. Divine omniscience suggests that a God knows everything about the universe, including every being's decisions. But if this God already knows what you will do, then your life simply follows a script. If the future is already determined, does that mean moral responsibility is meaningless? Can we blame people for their actions if they were always destined to occur? In science, this paradox takes a different form. Some physicists suggest that the universe works according to deterministic laws, which means that if we knew the precise position and movement of each atom, we could predict everything that will happen. This idea, once proposed by Pierre-Simon Laplace, suggests that the universe is a vast machine that works according to fixed principles, where the future is simply a deployment of past conditions. From this point of view, free will is an illusion. We believe that we are making decisions, but in reality, each decision was always going to happen exactly as it did. But this is where things get strange. Quantum mechanics introduces randomness at a fundamental level. Particles do not behave in a totally predictable way, which means that even with perfect knowledge, some events may still remain uncertain. If this is true, it could mean that the future is not written in stone, but does randomness by itself allow free will? Or does it only mean that some events are unknowable even for an omniscient being? Some philosophers propose a different solution. Perhaps omniscience does not mean knowing a fixed future, but knowing all possible futures. According to this point of view, the omniscient being sees all the potential paths that you could take, but does not dictate which one you will choose. But if this is true, then how can this being continue to be omniscient? If a being knows everything, but the future is uncertain, does it really know everything? The paradox of omniscience forces us to question whether knowledge and freedom can coexist. If the future is totally knowable, then perhaps we are only characters in a pre-written story. But if the future is truly open, then perhaps even an all-knowing entity must wait and see what happens. Or perhaps the answer is something that we cannot understand, because if we could, we would already know it. Close your eyes for a moment and try to find yourself, not your body, not your thoughts, but the core that is behind everything, that is looking through your eyes, that is listening to these words. You assume that there is a self, an entity in the center of your being that thinks, chooses, and experiences life. But what if that self does not really exist? What if the person you think you are is nothing more than an illusion, created by your brain. This is the illusion of the lost self, a paradox that challenges our most fundamental belief, the existence of a stable, unified self. At first, the idea seems absurd. Of course you exist, you think, you feel, you remember, but if you try to locate that self, you will find nothing more than a collection of fleeting experiences, thoughts, emotions, and sensations that are constantly changing. So, where is that which is you? Neuroscience suggests that the self is not a fixed entity, but rather a process, a story that the brain builds moment to create the illusion of continuity. Your memories, your personality, and your decisions seem to belong to a central self, but in reality, they are the result of millions of neuronal connections that are activated in real time. If these connections change due to an injury, an illness, or even drugs, so does the self. This suggests that what we call the self is not something we have, but something we generate. Consider a split brain patient, in whom the two hemispheres of the brain are surgically disconnected. Experiments show that each hemisphere can function independently, making decisions and maintaining separate thoughts. In some cases, one side of the brain will deny knowing what the other is doing, as if there were two separate consciences in the same body. If the self were a unique and unified thing, this should be impossible, but it happens. So, which half of the brain is the true self? Buddhism has long taught a similar idea, that the self is an illusion. In Buddhist philosophy, the Anatta doctrine states that there is no permanent and immutable self, only a flow of consciousness that seems to be unified, very similar to how a river seems continuous, but in reality, it is only flowing water. Our sense of self is a momentary illusion created by the thoughts that pass through the mind. This paradox becomes even more disturbing when applied to memory. We assume that we are the same person we were yesterday, last year, or a decade ago, but all the cells in your body have changed. Many of your memories have faded, have been altered, or have even been manufactured by your brain. If everything around you changes over time, what connects you to your past self? If nothing remains constant, was the you of 10 years ago the same person? Now let's take the paradox further. If the self is just an illusion, something that the brain creates but that does not really exist, who is experiencing that illusion? If there is no core, who is asking these questions? If the self is just a construction, then who or what is building it? The lost self, the illusion, challenges everything we assume about identity, free will, and consciousness itself. If we're only an illusion, if what we call self is nothing more than a trick of the mind, then what are we really? Perhaps the paradox is not that the self is missing, but that it was never there to begin with. Look at the night sky. Each little star is a sun possibly surrounded by planets, some of which may have the right conditions for life. The universe is vast, so vast that even if intelligent life were rare, there should be millions, if not billions, of civilizations out there. So why haven't we heard from any of them? This is the paradox of the silent universe, also known as the Fermi paradox. The disturbing contradiction between the high probability that extraterrestrial life exists and the absolute lack of evidence of it. If alien civilizations exist, why do they maintain such a disturbing silence? To grasp the paradox, we must consider how vast the universe is. The Milky Way alone contains over 100 billion stars, many of which have planets in the so-called habitable zone, where conditions could be conducive to life. Let's extend that to the trillions of galaxies in the observable universe, and the figures suggest that intelligent life should be common, even if only a small fraction of planets develop civilizations. There should be millions of advanced alien societies out there, yet we see nothing. No alien signals, no interstellar visitors, no irrefutable evidence that we are not alone. Despite decades of searching, scanning the skies with radio telescopes in search of artificial structures, and sending probes beyond our solar system, we have only found silence. This leads to several possible explanations, none of which are entirely satisfactory. One possibility is that we are truly alone, that life is so rare that we are the only intelligent beings in the universe. but this seems unlikely given the vast number of potentially habitable worlds. The laws of probability suggest that, even if intelligent life is uncommon, it should exist somewhere. Another explanation is that civilizations destroy themselves before they can spread. Perhaps all intelligent species inevitably reach a point where they develop technology that leads to their own extinction, whether through war, environmental collapse, or artificial intelligence. If this is true, then the silence of the universe is not because there is no one else out there, but because everyone has already disappeared. Some have proposed the idea of a great filter, a mysterious barrier that prevents civilizations from progressing beyond a certain point. This filter could be behind us, which would mean that life is incredibly rare and that we have been lucky to get this far, or it could be ahead of us, waiting to end us, just as it did with all the other civilizations that preceded us. If the latter is true, then the reason we don't hear anything may be because no one survives long enough to communicate. But what if the silence is intentional? Some believe that advanced civilizations may be deliberately avoiding contact, either because they see us as too primitive or because they follow a zoo hypothesis, observing but never interfering, just as we might observe animals in nature without revealing our presence. Another chilling possibility is that the universe is not silent, but dangerous, that there are hostile civilizations out there, and that the reason we don't hear anyone is because intelligent life knows it shouldn't reveal its presence. If this is true, then our own attempts to contact aliens by sending radio signals, probes, and messages are like shouting in a dark forest, hoping that nothing dangerous is listening. Finally, there is the possibility that we simply don't know what to look for. Extraterrestrial life may be so fundamentally different from everything we expect that we would not recognize it even if we had it in front of our noses. Perhaps they communicate in ways that escape our understanding, exist in dimensions that we cannot perceive, or have completely transcended physical form. The paradox of the silent universe forces us to face a disturbing question. Is silence proof that we are alone, or a warning that we are not? If there is intelligent life out there, why is it hiding, or worse, why is it disappearing? Perhaps one day we will find an answer, but until then we can only listen to the vast and empty cosmos, wondering what secrets it holds. Imagine you are walking down the street, and a stranger hands you a book. You open it and realize that it contains everything you will say and do in your life, written in detail. No matter what you try, every action you take is already described in the book. Even if you try to do the opposite of what is written, Book B already takes it into account. So have you ever had a choice? This is the problem of the time loop, predestination, a paradox that arises when the past, present, and future seem to be locked in a causal loop, an event that occurs because it was always destined to occur. If something is destined to happen, is it possible to change it? Or is time an unbreakable loop where free will is just an illusion? The paradox is often explored through time travel thought experiments. Imagine you go back in time to give Shakespeare a copy of his own works. He copies them word for word and publishes them. But where did the original works come from? They were never created. They just passed endlessly from one side to the other in time. If there was never a point of origin, then who really wrote them? This idea is known as a causal loop, in which an event is its own cause. In physics, this concept is often linked to the Novikov self-consistency principle, which suggests that time travel might be possible, but events must remain consistent, meaning that you can never really change the past because everything you do was always meant to happen. If you try to stop an event, the mere attempt will become the reason why it happens. Let's consider a time traveler who goes back in time to prevent a disaster, only to discover that his interference is what causes it. If the disaster was always destined to happen, is the time traveler really making a decision, or is he simply acting according to a script that was already written? The paradox becomes even stranger when applied to consciousness and free will. If your choices are the result of past events that have shaped your mind, and the future is already determined by those decisions, do you ever really make a decision? If time is a loop, every thought, every action, and every event simply unfold as they always should have. This paradox also challenges our understanding of cause and effect. We normally assume that causes lead to effects. Event A causes event B, which lead to event C, but in a predestination loop, event A only occurs because event C already occurred. This means that cause and effect lose their meaning and merge into a self-governing cycle in which the future determines the past as much as the past determines the future. One way to escape the paradox is through the multiverse theory, in which each decision creates a branching timeline. According to this view, if you travel in time, you do not change your own past, but create a completely new reality. But this does not solve the fundamental problem. If the future already exists, what force determines which version of reality we experience? Is free will real, or are we simply moving along a predetermined path without knowing that we are trapped in an endless cycle? The problem of time loop predestination forces us to question the nature of time itself. Is it a fixed structure in which all events are already written in stone, or is it fluid and capable of being rewritten? If we could see beyond time, seeing the past, present, and future as a whole, would we realize that everything has already happened, that we're simply playing a role in a story that was written before we were born? Perhaps time is not something through which we move. Perhaps we are part of time itself, repeating the same moments again and again, forever trapped in a loop without beginning or end. Imagine waking up in a world that seems almost identical to yesterday. Your room is the same, your routine has not changed, but something does not fit. People remember events differently, small details have changed inexplicably, and deep down, you cannot avoid the feeling that you are not in the reality in which you went to sleep. This is the disturbing core of the divided reality of the doppelganger, a paradox that explores the idea that multiple versions of reality exist simultaneously, each with its own version of you, and sometimes those versions mix with each other. The traditional concept of a doppelganger, a duplicate of yourself that exists elsewhere, has long been a source of folklore and fear, but in this paradox, the focus shifts from a physical copy to one based on reality. Could it be that with every decision you make, a new version of reality branches off, creating a new you who lives a life slightly different from yours? And if that is true, what would happen if two versions of you somehow merged, collided, or exchanged places? This concept relies heavily on the many-worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, which suggests that every possible outcome of every event actually occurs, each in its own parallel universe. In one reality, you became a musician. In another, you never attended the first class. It is said that these universes are inaccessible to each other, but what if that is not entirely true? What if certain individuals have moments, glitches, in which they become aware of other versions of themselves, in the form of déjà vu, strange memories that do not match your lived experiences, or dreams so vivid that they seem like real memories? Could they be signs that you are briefly brushing against another version of your life? Some people even claim to remember events that never happened, or to be sure that things existed in the past in a way that others deny. A phenomenon popularly known as the Mandela effect. If there are countless versions of you living slightly different lives in infinite realities, then who is the real you? Is your consciousness fixed on a timeline, or is it adrift between them, creating the illusion of coherence where it does not really exist? And what happens if two versions of you become aware of themselves and realize that they are not alone in the music multiverse? The paradox intensifies when we consider the possibility of reality shifting, where consciousness jumps between timelines. If you wake up feeling that something fundamental has changed, people behave differently, and memories do not match, could it be that you have slipped into a different version of reality in which you were always destined to exist, but with a slightly altered story? Some theorists speculate that near-death experiences, major traumas, or even deep states of meditation could cause a shift in consciousness that moves a person from one version of reality to another. Others argue that it happens all the time, but we are too immersed in our own narratives to notice. But the most disturbing question of all is this: if multiple versions of you exist, and they are all equally real, then your sense of self is nothing more than a flash of consciousness among countless others. The reality of the doppelganger, the division, forces us to question the integrity of memory, the fluidity of identity, and the nature of reality itself. If reality can fracture into infinite versions at every moment, and each version contains a different version of you, then the notion of a true self becomes impossible. Perhaps the doppelganger is not someone you meet on the street, but someone you were yesterday, or someone you could have been tomorrow if you had made a different decision. And perhaps, just perhaps, you too are someone else's doppelganger, adrift in a reality that was not originally yours. You open your eyes in a room you don't recognize. Everything seems familiar, but strangely surreal. After a moment of confusion, you realize it must be a dream, but then you wake up again and again until you're finally not sure if you have really woken up or if you're still dreaming. This is the dream within a dream, a disturbing paradox that questions whether it is ever really possible to distinguish between real life and a sufficiently vivid dream. We all accept that dreams can seem real. Within a dream, your brain convinces you that the impossible is normal, that time flows naturally, that the people around you are authentic, even if they are a product of your imagination. But what if reality itself worked the same way? If you can be completely convinced that you are awake while dreaming, how can you be sure that you're not dreaming right now? This paradox has disturbed philosophers for centuries. In ancient China, the philosopher Zhuangzi dreamed that he was a butterfly. Upon awakening, he asked the famous question, "Am I a man who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly that now dreams he is a man?" Dream and reality were indistinguishable, and that is the essence of the paradox. Even modern science does not offer easy answers. The brain constructs our perception of reality using sensory information, but those same neural pathways are active during REM sleep, when dreams occur. Your dream self can see, hear, touch, and think just like you when you are awake. The difference lies solely in coherence. Reality seems to follow rules. Dreams do not. But if you were in a dream that perfectly imitated the coherence of real life, how could you know the difference? This leads us to the disturbing possibility that you could be in a nested dream, a dream within another, without a clear way out. Every time you wake up, you may just be entering another layer. What appears to be reality may be nothing more than the last veil. And the deepest implication is this: what if life itself is a dream, not in a metaphorical sense, but literally? Some philosophers and scientists have speculated that our experience of the world could be a simulation, a projection of consciousness, or a form of lucid dream that we have forgotten we are having. If you could not distinguish between a perfect dream and reality, would the distinction matter? Lucid dreamers often report a sudden shift in consciousness, an epiphany that everything around them is imaginary. But this understanding rarely comes uninvited. Most of the time, the dream seems completely real until it stops being so. So, what if the same thing happens with our waking life? What if enlightenment is not about seeing more, but about waking up from the illusion we call reality? And here is the final twist. Even if you suspect you are dreaming, the mere fact of questioning it could be part of the dream. Your doubts, your logic, your attempts to wake up. Everything could be written into the illusion, reinforcing it instead of breaking it. The paradox of the dream within a dream forces us to question the foundations of existence. Is there any objective proof that what we experience is real, or is reality defined by nothing more than our conviction that it is not a dream? Perhaps deep down we are all like Zhuangzi, unable to say for sure whether we are butterflies dreaming of being humans or humans dreaming of butterflies, and perhaps the most terrifying thought of all is not that we are dreaming, but that we may never wake up. Imagine living forever, without aging, without diseases, without end. At first it seems like a dream, infinite time to explore, learn, love, and create, but extend that idea further. 1,000 years, 10,000, 1,000,000, long after the stars have gone out, after every memory fades into abstraction, what remains of you? This is the contradiction of immortality, the paradox that questions whether eternal life would preserve the self or ultimately erase it. If your conscience never ends, can it really remain as you, Or would it slowly dissolve into something unrecognizable over time? We associate life with change. We evolve through experiences, relationships, challenges, and losses, but these changes occur within a framework of limits. Among them is the limit of time. Knowing that life is finite shapes our urgency, our choices, and even our sense of living. If you had infinite time, what motivation would you have to do something today or tomorrow? Philosophers have long debated whether immortality is a blessing or a curse. In the famous essay by Bernard Williams, The Macropulos Case, he argues that eternal life would end up becoming unbearable, not because of pain, but because of the eternal boredom of having nothing new to experience and without an end in sight. Even the happiest moments would lose their flavor, novelty would fade, and you would sink into apathy, unable to escape the monotony of infinite time. But the contradiction sharpens if your personality is shaped by memories and experiences, since throughout an infinite life those experiences would accumulate beyond comprehension. You would forget things, not only small details, but entire lives. Your past self would become a stranger. You could even forget your name, your identity, your origins, until nothing remained of the person who first obtained immortality. Then, who is the immortal being? Are you still you if your memories are erased and your personality has changed 1,000 times? Or have you died and been reborn countless times, each version unaware of the others? If your continuity of memory is broken, then what does immortality preserve? Some argue that to be truly immortal, you would need a perfect memory to carry every moment of your existence as an eternal archive. But such a burden could be worse. The human mind struggles to cope with even a lifetime of memories. Imagine carrying millions of years of emotional weight, joys, and overlapping traumas without end. Could any conscience endure that without breaking? Religious and spiritual traditions address immortality differently. Many describe eternal life as liberation from suffering and fusion with the divine, or entry into eternal happiness. But this is not immortality in the literal sense. It is a transformation into something beyond the self. In that case, you, as you know yourself, would cease to exist, and there is the crux of the contradiction. Immortality promises an infinite existence, but not necessarily the preservation of identity over time. The accumulation of experiences, the erosion of memory, and the inevitable change of personality would turn you into something completely different. So, would eternal life really defeat death, or would it simply replace it with a slower, more subtle form of erasure, a death by dilution extended throughout eternity? The contradiction of immortality asks us to face the illusion that the value of life lies in its duration. Perhaps it is not how long we live that matters, but that we live knowing that it is going to end. That knowledge gives weight to our decisions, urgency to our relationships, and meaning to our history. If you could live forever, would you still choose to live, or is it precisely the limit of life that makes it worth living? Try this. Think of something completely outside your ability to think, something impossible. No matter how hard you try, you're limited by your own mind, but that raises a disturbing paradox. If they're thoughts that are truly unthinkable, how can we know they exist? And if we cannot know that they exist, do they really exist? This is the paradox of unthinkable thought, a dilemma that forces us to question the limits of human cognition. Are there ideas, concepts, or truths so foreign to our minds that we don't even know they exist? At first, this may seem like a language game, but the implications are profound. Every thought we have is shaped by language, culture, experience, and the biological structure of our brain. We like to believe that with enough intelligence, creativity, or technology, we could discover all the truths. But what if there are entire categories of knowledge that our brain is simply unable to perceive? Think of color. Humans see a specific range of the electromagnetic spectrum, but many animals, such as the mantis shrimp, can see spectra of light that we cannot even imagine. For a human, ultraviolet is invisible, but for a mantis shrimp, it is as real as any color. Now apply that to consciousness itself. What if there are entire realms of knowledge that are as invisible to us as ultraviolet light? If we lack the ability to perceive them, we wouldn't even suspect they exist. This paradox also applies to mathematics and logic. Some problems seem unsolvable not because they are difficult, but because our current understanding of logic itself may be insufficient to address them. Gödel's incompleteness theorems suggest that in any formal system of mathematics, there will always be truths that cannot be proven within that system. In other words, some knowledge will forever be beyond our reach, not because they do not exist, but because our framework of thought is incomplete. The paradox becomes even stranger when we consider artificial intelligence. Let's imagine a superintelligent AI that surpasses human understanding. It would be able to have thoughts that we could never understand, not because they are complex, but because they exist in a conceptual space beyond human cognition. If such thoughts exist, then we might be like ants trying to understand quantum mechanics, completely unable to even recognize what we don't know. And here's the real question that leaves us breathless. Are we already surrounded by unthinkable thoughts? Could the answers to life's greatest mysteries, consciousness, the nature of time, and the origin of existence, be hidden in ideas that we are simply not capable of conceiving? Some philosophers suggest that enlightenment or higher states of consciousness could provide glimpses of ideas beyond conventional thought. Mystical experiences, deep meditative states, and altered perceptions have led some to claim that they have understood truths beyond words, ideas that cannot be explained, only felt. But even if such experiences provide access to unthinkable thoughts, these remain locked within the limitations of language and memory once we return to normal. Music, the paradox of unthinkable thought, forces us to face the limits of our own existence. We like to believe that we are intelligent enough to understand the universe. But what if we are simply trapped within the limits of what our brain allows us to perceive? If there are thoughts that we can never think, how can we know they exist? And if we cannot know that they exist, are we forever trapped in an illusion of understanding? Perhaps the greatest limit of knowledge is not what we do not know, but what we cannot imagine ever. Wherever you go, there you are. You see the world through your own eyes, you hear sounds through your own ears, and you think within the limits of your own mind. But here is the paradox. You will never be able to directly experience existence outside yourself. This is the paradox of the observer's prison, the disturbing understanding that no matter how much you learn, travel, or expand your awareness, you are permanently trapped within the subjective experience of your own mind. At first, this seems obvious. After all, we experience life from a first-person perspective, but consider the implications. Every thought you have, every emotion you feel, every perception of reality is filtered through your brain and your consciousness, and you can never get out of it. You can never switch minds with another person. You never know what it is really like to be another person. You will never experience the world from any point of view other than your own, even if you try to. Imagine the perspective of another being, be it a loved one, an animal, or an alien. You're still doing it from your own mind. Every attempt to understand another consciousness is still processed through your own consciousness. This raises a disturbing question. Is there any way to really know other minds exist? We take it for granted that other people are aware like us, but how can we be sure? Philosophers call this the problem of other minds. The fact that we can never directly experience what another being is feeling. For all we know, everyone else could be an advanced simulation, a reflection, or an illusion that acts exactly like conscious beings, but without any real internal experience. If this sounds far-fetched, consider how artificial intelligence is advancing. AI chatbots, deep learning programs, and virtual assistants can already mimic human conversation and react in ways that seem intelligent. If a future AI were sophisticated enough to perfectly simulate emotions, thoughts, and self-awareness, how could we prove that it is not truly conscious, or, more disturbingly, what if it believed it was? Now apply the same logic to your own existence. If you are trapped in your own mind, unable to directly demonstrate the consciousness of anything outside yourself, How would you know that you're not the only conscious being that exists? Be the only observer in a universe full of unconscious automatons? This paradox extends even further to physics and perception. The famous double-slit experiment in quantum mechanics suggests that observation itself affects reality. Particles behave differently when observed than when they are not. Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that consciousness is not just a passive observer, but an active participant in shaping reality itself. But if observation affects reality, and you're the only observer you can directly confirm, could it be that the universe only exists because you're looking at it? If you disappeared, would reality itself collapse? Some philosophical traditions have explored this paradox for centuries in solipsism. The idea is taken to the extreme by arguing that the only thing that can be truly known is one's own mind. Everything else, other people, the world, even time itself, could be a projection, an illusion designed to give the impression of an external world. But if you're the only true observer, then you're trapped inside your own mind with no escape. The paradox of the observer's prison forces us to confront the terrifying possibility that consciousness is not a window to the universe, but a cage that locks us into an isolated perspective. We are prisoners of our own consciousness, unable to get out of ourselves, unable to verify the consciousness of anything beyond our own experience. Perhaps reality is full of other minds, other observers as real as you. Or perhaps you're the only one here observing a universe that exists only for you. Imagine waking up one day with no memory of the past. Everything you once knew, your name, your experiences, your identity, has disappeared. You are aware and thinking, but you have no idea where you come from. All that exists is the present moment. Now, think about this. What if the same thing happened to the future? What if your future self existed someday, but had no memory of having been you? If that were the case, would your future self still be you? And if not, would you really continue into the future? This is the paradox of the forgotten future, the disturbing idea that if you cannot remember having been your future self, then, from your perspective, the future never really arrives. At first, this may seem like a play on words. Of course, the future arrives every day. You wake up and move forward in time. But consider the deeper implications. Yourself no longer exists in any meaningful way. You can remember it, but that version of you no longer exists, just as your future self is not here yet. And when it arrives, the person who is thinking this right now will no longer exist as you are now. This paradox challenges the very idea of personal continuity. We assume that we are the same person over time. But how can that be true if each version of us fades into nothing and is replaced by someone who only remembers having been us? If the only thing that connects your past self and your future self is memory, what happens when those memories fade? The implications become even stranger when we consider cases of severe amnesia. Some people lose all memory of their past self and yet continue to live as fully functional individuals. If a person has no memory of who they once were, are they still the same person? If not, are you really the same person you were 10 years ago? Or has your past self disappeared as much as any stranger you have never met? Now apply this to the future. If memory is what gives you the illusion of personal continuity, then, from your current perspective, your future self is a completely different person, someone you will never really get to know. From this point of view, the present moment is all that exists. The past is just a memory, and the future is something you will never really reach. Because when it arrives, the you that exists now will have disappeared. This paradox also raises profound questions about death and time. If each moment replaces the previous one, then, is death really an abrupt end? Or is it simply the continuation of what happens every second, a version of you disappearing and being replaced by another? And if you're constantly being replaced, is the fear of death a misconception after all? The person who will experience your death is not the person who is experiencing this moment now. Philosophers and neuroscientists have long debated whether the self is a continuous entity or a collection of disconnected experiences. Some argue that consciousness is like a flowing river, which seems unified, but is actually made up of constantly changing moments. Others believe that the self is an illusion, a story that the brain tells itself to maintain a sense of identity, even though there is no you that is truly fixed. The paradox of the forgotten future forces us to confront a disturbing reality. The person who is reading this now will soon be nothing more than a memory, replaced by another person who may believe they are you, but who is actually a completely new being. So, if you will never truly experience your future self, if your existence is limited only to this moment, then, in a way, does the future even exist? Try to imagine what it was like before you were born. Without thoughts, without perception, nor consciousness, only nothingness. Now try to imagine what it will be like after you die, another stretch of nothingness that extends forever. But here is the paradox. If you really did not exist, how could you be aware of it? This is the problem of the consciousness of non-existence, a paradox that forces us to confront the disturbing contradiction between our own mortality and the impossibility of experiencing nothingness. If death is the absence of consciousness, then there will never be a you that recognizes it. So, in a way, from your perspective, non-existence is impossible. At first, this may seem like a play on words. We know that countless people have lived and died before us. We see animals, plants, and entire species disappear from existence. The universe was here long before we were born and will continue to exist long after we have disappeared. But the moment we try to place ourselves in that non-existence, the concept crumbles. To be aware of not existing, there must be an observer. But if non-existence means the absence of an observer, then there can be no one to experience it. This means that, from a first-person perspective, non-existence is never real, because as long as there is experience, existence continues. Philosophers have struggled with this paradox for centuries. The ancient Greek thinker Epicurus argued that death is not something to be feared because we will never experience it. In his words, when we exist, death is not, and when death exists, we are not. His argument was simple. Since we are never alive and dead at the same time, we never really encounter death itself. But does that mean that non-existence is truly real if it is never part of our experience? Think about this. Your consciousness is all you have known. Even when you sleep, your mind continues dreaming, creating a continuous thread of consciousness. The only moments of total unconsciousness, such as deep anesthesia, are experiences that we cannot remember, which makes them indistinguishable from non-existence. But what if death is simply an eternal version of this, a state so empty that there is no one left to recognize it? This paradox also leads to a disturbing possibility. If you can never be aware of not existing, does that mean that you are trapped in an infinite loop of existence? If consciousness cannot perceive its own absence, then, from your own point of view, something must always exist. Some have speculated that this could mean that death is always followed by some form of continued consciousness, whether through rebirth, a new consciousness, or even an eternal return in which the same life is lived over and over again. In some interpretations of quantum mechanics, this paradox takes an even stranger turn. Some physicists speculate that consciousness and reality are deeply linked, that an observer is necessary for the universe to exist in a meaningful way. If this is true, then your consciousness is not only experiencing reality, but is part of what creates it. This raises the disturbing question of whether if your consciousness were to disappear completely, the universe itself would disappear with it. Religious and spiritual traditions address this paradox in different ways. Many believe that consciousness is eternal and survives beyond physical death. Others suggest that what we call the self is an illusion, that there is no personal identity that continues after death, because there was never really a separate self to begin with. But if that is true, then what is it that experiences life? The problem of the consciousness of non-existence forces us to confront an idea that we cannot fully understand, the end of experience itself. If we are only capable of knowing existence, does that mean that existence is all there is? And if death cannot be experienced, then, from our perspective, does it really happen? Perhaps the greatest paradox of all is that we will never have an answer, because to answer we would have to be here to know it. Imagine yourself in front of two doors. Behind one is eternal happiness, behind the other, eternal suffering. But there's a problem. You do not know where each door leads. And what is worse, the moment you choose, the choice itself determines the result. In other words, the act of deciding is what makes the door lead to one destination or another. So how to choose? This is the paradox of the impossible choice, a dilemma that arises when a decision must be made, but any rational basis for choosing collapses the moment you try to apply it. If each action depends on a previous cause and free will is an illusion, then can a decision really be made, or is each decision an inevitability that was always going to happen? At first glance, making decisions seems simple. We constantly decide what to eat, what to say, where to go. But let us consider the deeper mechanics of decision-making. Each choice is influenced by past experiences, biological impulses, subconscious thoughts, and external forces. If each decision is a reaction to these factors, is it really a choice or just a predetermined sequence of cause and effect? The paradox becomes even stranger when we introduce equally balanced options. Imagine that you are hungry and you are presented with two identical plates of food placed the same distance from you. There is no rational reason to choose one over the other. This is called Buridan's ass, a mental experiment in which a donkey placed between two identical piles of hay stars because it has no logical way to decide which one to eat. If no external force intervenes, how does a decision arise? Now apply it to a more complex scenario. Imagine that you are facing two life-changing decisions, two careers, two paths, two futures. If both seem equally attractive or equally terrifying, what really determines which path you take? If all the reasons for choosing one apply equally to the other, does the decision lose its meaning? And if it makes no sense, does that mean that free will is an illusion and choices are simply illusions of control? Some philosophers argue that we do not really make decisions. We simply realize the decisions that we were always going to make. Your brain, which operates at a subconscious level, has already determined your decision even before you consciously think about it. Neuroscience has shown that brain activity related to decision-making can be detected seconds before a person is aware of their choice. If this is true, do we really choose something, or do we simply tell ourselves a story after the fact? The paradox extends beyond psychology to physics and logic. In quantum mechanics, particles do not have defined states until observed. This means that, at a fundamental level, reality itself is in a state of uncertainty until something forces a decision. But what if our choices work the same way, existing in multiple possibilities until we collapse into a single reality? Religious and philosophical traditions have explored this paradox for centuries. Some believe that choices are an illusion because everything is already determined, whether by destiny, divine will, or the laws of the universe. Others argue that free will exists, but only in the sense that it is a kind of self-imposed illusion that we experience when making decisions because the alternative, a world without agency, is too disturbing to accept. But here's the most disturbing question. If choices are illusions, does anything we do really matter? If every decision is already predetermined, does the act of choosing have any real meaning, or are we simply playing out a script written by forces beyond our control? The paradox of the impossible choice forces us to confront the idea that decision-making might not be what we think. If free will is an illusion, then our sense of agency is nothing more than a comforting lie. If true choice is impossible, then perhaps we never really decide anything. We simply follow a path that was always going to unfold. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the ability to question the nature of choice is in itself the only true choice we have. Think about the last decision you made. Perhaps it was what to eat for breakfast, what route to take home, or whether to continue reading this script. It felt as if you had made the right decision, but what if it wasn't? What if free will is an illusion, and every decision you make was always going to happen exactly as it did. This is the illusion of free will, a dilemma, a paradox that challenges our deeply held belief that we are in control of our actions when, in reality, we may be nothing more than complex machines following predetermined patterns. At first glance, free will seems obvious. We can imagine multiple outcomes and weigh different possibilities before making a decision. But this is where the paradox begins. If every decision is based on previous causes, your genetics, your education, your past experiences, your subconscious thoughts, then are you really choosing something, or are you simply reacting to an unbroken chain of events that has led you here? Modern neuroscience provides disturbing evidence that our brains decide before we are aware. In famous experiments conducted by Benjamin Libet, researchers found that brain activity related to decision-making occurs several seconds before a person consciously chooses something. This suggests that what we experience as a conscious decision is actually just the brain informing us of a choice it has already made. If this is true, then what we call free will may simply be a delayed awareness of an inevitable outcome. The choice already existed, and we are the last to know. The paradox becomes even deeper when we consider physics and determinism. If the universe follows strict laws of cause and effect, then every event, including every thought and action, is the inevitable result of what came before. The atoms in your brain move according to these laws, which means that your thoughts and actions were set in motion from the beginning of time. If you could rewind the universe and play it again, would you make the same decisions? If the answer is yes, then your decisions were never really yours to begin with. They were dictated by forces beyond your control. Some argue that quantum mechanics, in which particles behave unpredictably, allows for free will, but randomness alone does not create freedom. If your decisions are just the result of random quantum fluctuations, is that any better than strict determinism? Strict determinism? You would still not be choosing, just reacting to chaos. If free will is an illusion, what about morality and responsibility? We punish criminals because we believe they had the option to do good or evil. But if every action is predetermined, are we really responsible for anything? Should society hold people accountable for decisions they were always destined to make? Some philosophers argue that even if free will is an illusion, we should act as if it were real, because without it, the meaning of ethics and personal growth would collapse. But does believing in a comforting illusion make it true? One possible solution is compatibilism, which suggests that free will and determinism are not mutually exclusive. According to this point of view, even if our actions are caused by past events, they are still our actions. We just define freedom differently, not as pure unpredictability, but as acting according to our own internal motivations. But even this does not completely escape the paradox, because those motivations are still shaped by factors beyond our control: biology, environment, and experiences that we never chose. The illusion of free will forces us to confront the possibility that choice itself is an illusion. We feel like we are the authors of our own lives, but perhaps we are just characters playing a script written by the universe. Or perhaps the act of questioning free will is in itself the only real choice we have. Try to observe your own mind in operation, not your thoughts, but the thinker behind them. Who or what is observing? At the moment you try to look inward and locate the origin of your own consciousness, it seems to fade, retreating just beyond your reach. This is the paradox of the mind that cannot observe itself, a fundamental contradiction that challenges the nature of self-awareness. If consciousness is what perceives, how can it turn around and perceive itself? If the mind is the observer, what does the observer observe? At first, it may seem like a problem of perspective. Your eyes cannot see themselves without a mirror. A knife cannot cut itself. But consciousness is not like a physical object. It is the lens through which everything is experienced. And yet, no matter how much we examine it, we cannot get out of it to really see what it is. Neuroscience suggests that what we call the self is not a singular thing, but a collection of processes that occur in the brain. Thoughts arise, emotions change, memory surfaces, and it all seems like it is happening to you. But when you try to locate the core of that self, there is no part of the brain responsible. It is not a thing, but an experience that cannot be separated from the act of observing. Philosophers and mystics have debated this paradox for centuries. In Advaita Vedanta, it is said that the self is like a fire trying to burn itself. It can never truly understand its own nature because it is precisely what is understanding. Similarly, Zen Buddhism speaks of the gateless gate, the idea that enlightenment does not come from seeking the self, but from realizing that there has never been a separate self. Some cognitive scientists propose that consciousness is simply a hallucination of a self, a trick the brain plays on us to create the illusion of a continuous identity. If this is true, then the reason the mind cannot observe itself is because there is nothing to observe, just a changing collection of experiences that we mistake for a fixed identity. This paradox also relates to the famous brain in a vat thought experiment. If you were just a brain connected to electrodes sending you signals that simulate a reality, you would have no way of knowing, but here's the problem. If your thoughts, perceptions, and sense of self are constructs, is there any real way to determine if you're really conscious, or if consciousness is just another illusion created by physical processes? The paradox deepens when considering modern physics and the observer's role in quantum mechanics. The mere act of observing alters reality's state. If consciousness plays a role in shaping the universe, the paradox arises again. If the mind cannot observe itself, how does it know it exists? If reality depends on observation, but the observer can never directly observe himself, does the mind exist in a strange loop impossible to demonstrate, perceiving forever but unable to perceive itself? Some argue that true self-awareness is impossible, that the very nature of the mind prevents it from turning inward in a meaningful way. Others believe the only way to resolve this paradox is to completely dissolve the illusion of self, to recognize that there is no thinker, only thoughts, no observer, only observation. The paradox of a mind that cannot observe itself forces us to confront the possibility that our sense of identity is not something we have, but something we create. If we are nothing more than a process in development, then perhaps there never was a separate self to observe, only a momentary reflection in an infinite mirror in the first place. Imagine that humanity has reached the peak of knowledge. All the mysteries of the universe have been unraveled, all the laws of physics are understood, and all philosophical questions have been answered. We have deciphered the fabric of reality itself. But then, being on the edge of definitive understanding, a final question arises so profound that it shakes the foundations of everything we thought we knew. This is the final question, the paradox, the disturbing idea that no matter how much we learn, no matter how deep our knowledge, there will always be one more question, one that will remain unanswered, either because it is unknowable or because it destroys the very possibility of understanding. At first glance, it seems logical that there may be a definitive answer for everything. Science advances by solving problems, discovering deeper truths, and refining our models of reality. But knowledge is structured so that each answer leads to new questions. The more we understand, the more we realize how much we do not know. If we ever reached a point where no new questions could be asked, would that mean that we really understand everything, or that we have reached the limits of what is possible to know? Some of the deepest questions of existence remain unanswered. Why is there something instead of nothing? What is consciousness? Is the universe infinite, or does it have a limit? If we ever answer these questions, will we finally arrive at the ultimate truth, or will we simply reveal a new layer of mystery? Philosophy has long grappled with this paradox. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates affirmed the famous phrase, "I only know that I know nothing." The more one seeks wisdom, the more one realizes the depth of their ignorance. In a way, true knowledge may be realizing that absolute knowledge is impossible. Even mathematics suggests that some truths will always remain beyond our reach. Gödel's incompleteness theorems demonstrate that, within any logical system, there will always be truths that cannot be demonstrated within that system. This means that Even if we believe we have arrived at the definitive answer, we may simply be trapped within a framework that prevents us from seeing the bigger picture. Now, let's consider the possibility that the final question is not only unknowable, but unanswerable. What if there was a truth so beyond human understanding that we don't even have the language, intelligence, or cognitive structure to formulate it? If that is the case, then we are like fish trying to understand quantum mechanics, unable even to conceive of the concepts that would reveal reality's ultimate nature. The paradox also applies to artificial intelligence. If we ever create a super-intelligent AI capable of answering all possible questions, would it reach a final point where it simply shuts down, unable to process the ultimate unanswered question? Or worse yet, would it discover a truth so profound that it would render existence meaningless? Would the ultimate question be the one that puts an end to all religious and spiritual questions? Traditions have speculated about this paradox for long. Some believe that the ultimate question is reserved for the moment of death, when reality's ultimate nature is revealed. Others suggest that the answer lies beyond time, space, and even thought itself. But if the final answer exists beyond the limits of human perception, can it ever be known? The paradox of the final question forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. If each answer leads to a deeper mystery, perhaps we will never reach the end of the search for truth. Perhaps we are not destined to find the definitive answer, because the act of questioning is what keeps reality in constant evolution. And therefore, at the end of all knowledge, at the limits of all understanding, the greatest mystery may not be what the final question is, but whether we are capable of asking it. After traveling through 20 of life's greatest unanswered questions, a disturbing truth emerges. The deeper we delve into the search for answers, the more new layers of mystery we discover. Each paradox has led us not to certainty, but to the understanding that some questions may never be resolved. What if the self is just an illusion, a trick of the brain that cannot observe itself? What if free will is nothing more than an afterthought in a predetermined universe? What if time is an illusion, the past never really existed, and the future will never really arrive? What if our search for knowledge is infinite? Not because the answers don't exist, but because each answer creates a new question in its place. Perhaps the greatest paradox of all is that the more we learn, the less we know. Each attempt to understand existence only reveals how little we understand. We seek to escape the limits of our own perception, but we're trapped forever in it, prisoners of consciousness, limited by the limits of what our minds can perceive, and yet it is precisely this search, this endless search for truth, that defines us. It is not in the final answers, but in the act of questioning where meaning is found. The paradoxes that haunt us are not obstacles. They are invitations. Invitations to think more deeply, to question ourselves, to embrace the unknown instead of fearing it. So perhaps the greatest wisdom is not to resolve existence's paradoxes, but to accept them, to let the questions remain open as infinite doors leading to the unknown, because in the end, the most important question may not be whether we will find the truth, but whether we have the courage to continue searching.